The Business Revolution.
Well, welcome, revolutionaries. My name is Alan.
And I'm Mick.
And I'm Cherry. Together we're the three business musketeers who will guide you through the evolving landscape of business and sustainability.
This podcast is made on the lands of the Boonwurrung, the Yugara and Turrbal, and the Wadawurrung people, to whom we pay our respects and acknowledgement. And in today's episode, we are moving from Australia up to Europe.
Businesses increasingly recognize that their success is intertwined with well-being of society and across the globe. Businesses are not just local. Today, we'll explore how a business can create a more inclusive and equitable future across the world.
So today we'll explore global issues and multilateralism.
And if this isn't the first time that you're listening to the Business Revolution podcast, then you know already that we are on a mission here. We are all about proving to the world that sustainability isn't just good for the planet, it's good for our health, our pockets, and for our businesses, for the economy.
So whether you're a business owner, a climate advocate, or simply curious about the future of our planet, you don't want to miss this episode of the Business Revolution.
And that's why we're thrilled to have Robin and Alyssa with us today. Robin is the Managing Director of the Global Institute of Leadership and Technology, and Liz is the professional board member in the multilateralism space. Welcome to the Business Revolution, Liz and Robin. Can you start by telling us a little bit about what you're currently working on?
Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and happy to discuss these wonderful topics that are lying in front of us here. So, I mean, you pretty much summed it up from the title of the company. So we're working on leadership development and technology implementation. And one big part of technology here is that it's not just the techie part of it, but also the non-technical aspects. What can we gain from technology? How can we use it to create a better planet, whatever that might mean? We will explore this later.
Excellent. What I'm currently working on is three things at the moment. Number one, as chair of the International Centre for Living Aquatic Marine Resources, we're looking at how fish breeding and breeding of marine resources can be as sustainable as possible in the global context, as well as what role aquatic foods has, either in terms of new materials, new goods, and its symbiotic relationship with fish. On the other side, as a board member of a large German corporation, we're looking at our sustainability footprint in industrial plastics and plastic product development in terms of how do we really move forward in this world with ensuring our value chain is fit, strong, representing our values, solid in the current and future geopolitical environment, which as of today, September 24, we don't know how will be. And the third thing, I'm engaged with the United Nations in the Pacific Island region, specifically looking at developing governance around transparency and accountability in public finance management, especially important in the Pacific Islands as they are facing a very existential threat regarding their safety, security, population, and livelihoods. So what is a mechanism today that we can use to work together with civil service organizations, NGOs, science, and the government about expenditure for these populations' future developments?
Well, I'm particularly intrigued by that last point about around the Pacific region. I saw in today's news how the Indonesian government has lost a court case for not actually creating strong enough targets from 2031 onwards. And so that's the people fighting back in those countries. So it's quite an interesting dynamic that will be changing there, I'm sure. I'm going to start with us, though. We get into a very big minefield there, so I'm going to pull away at that point. And actually go to Robin. And I'm curious, coming from a tech background, and you've talked about technology and sustainability and your business name being leadership and technology. Can you help us define what that technology and leadership are in the respect to sustainability?
I love this question because it's already fire that we're now putting here into this room because there's like so many definitions out there. But I think it's a really valuable question because from my perspective, the definition itself is not that important. It's rather the understanding of each other, what we mean when we're actually using these kind of words. So my background is actually, I'm a typical business school graduate, but I was always really frustrated with that aspect that in my whole life at business school, I've barely touched on any technology topics. I always found it like super, super cool what you can actually do with that. And I think like all these buzzwords that we have heard over the last years, be it like digital transformation, be it industry 4.0, you name it, was always like driven from the business world, but actually nobody was talking about this in this whole context. And that really got me onto this track of saying like, hey, why not combine leadership/business education with technology and make it more accessible and build the bridge between those two disciplines? Because it turned out that a lot of those things that we're referring to in traditional business education, or also in traditional businesses called management, is actually partly being replaced by technology. And we're seeing this is going on and on and on and on. So more of those things that used to be done as managers is now being done or automated by technology. So I think it's crucial that in this world, we need to understand technology and the implications of the technology. It's not that everybody needs to understand all these algorithms and how these infrastructure technologies work, but like the implications to understand on the business modules, on the roles, on the organizational setup, I think is really, really crucial. And I think there's a really big gap in traditional education and also like in the ongoing development of executives in organization. Then for the leadership part, I personally define it, and within our organization, we define it as the activation of a group towards a goal. And this is quite a neutral statement, but it has quite a lot of interesting things in there. So first of all, it's the question of a goal. That's where many people already struggle with. Well, so what's our goal? Why are we working on something particular? How do we break down this goal that it is actually something that we can work on? You mentioned, Alan, the 2031 targets. I think that's a great example. So defining something for the year 2031 is nice, but it doesn't really help you if you can't break it down to what do we actually do today, tomorrow, and the next week in an executable way that people can actually work on. And then the two other aspects, a group of people, that's also the next challenge. So what's a group? What are your stakeholders? What are your intersections? Whom do you need to take onto this journey? And then the last part is, how do you activate these people? And activation is all about doing something. So you need three things for leadership. You need a goal. You need to break it down to a certain degree. That's the first big challenge. You need a group of people. I mean, you can lead yourself to a goal. That's okay. But you probably want to have a group of people around you that are contributing, that are aligned, and that are working towards that. And then you need the activation part. And all of this is neutral because we're never judging if your goal is good or bad, because we're living in such a time where so much uncertainty and ambiguity is out there that I think it's really hard to say like, oh, Alan, your goals are great and Cherry, your goals are bad, or vice versa. I think we need to really come to this meaningful discussion and say like, okay, why have you chosen this particular goals and why are you working towards that? What are your assumptions for choosing that? And then we can have meaningful discussions. And I think that's where we can start creating.
I think what you're referring to there is the binary thinking that we tend to have. Is right or wrong, left or right. And yeah, there's lots of right. There's lots of correct. There's lots of ways we can go forward. Mm-hmm. And I think I love the point about we don't want to go on our own. We might be able to get there on our own, but just like let's say a sprinter or a long distance runner in the Olympics, they don't get there on their own. They might be doing it on the day, but it's a team effort. But yeah, that's how I don't know. That's how it resonates with me. So thank you.
Yeah, it really resonated what you were saying, Robin, with me around that activation. And a question for both of you is, how can you help leaders activate, and also both in public and private sectors, so that they can accelerate their transition to a future worth living? I think it's beyond 2031. 2031 is just around the corner. So looking further afield.
I would say there's three aspects for me that stand out. One is an element of long-termism, because in the end, activation, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So long-termism, I guess, openness for adaptive pathways, as opposed to what Alan was saying before, the black and white, and I would say the collaboration. So in terms of long-termism, when in a German corporation I was working at, when we had our sustainability goals as compliance oriented in terms of this amount of plastics and that supply chain transparency law and this national goal that according to our size of organization we have to report on, when we were compliance oriented, it was short-term, tick and flick kind of accounting-oriented approach to sustainability. And we weren't growing our business with that. We were submitting reports. When, from a long-termism perspective, when we sat down with the team and discussed, okay, how is our organization going to grow? Is there anything in the sustainability field that will help us grow our business? It could be material science. It could be our supply chain. It could be our distribution strategy. It can be our waste management strategy. Anyway, but basically, where's the gold? Where's the business we're missing because we're not looking for business within sustainability? That turned our product sales, percentage of sustainable product sales, from 1% to 19.8% in 1.5 years. And that's for still just operating in the industrial countries, but that's an industrial plastics organization across solid 16 countries. And that was the difference between thinking compliance to thinking growth. So I think, and that's an element of long-termism that's in there. And it went from being dry muesli you have to chew to business to grow. And then we activated what naturally our amazing procurement team and sales team and product development team are trained to look for. We would, we would encourage them to dig for the gold rather than a race to the bottom for compliance. So I think that's one aspect. Another example I'd like to talk about is adaptive pathways, which is recognizing a systems thinking perspective on the interconnected nature of things. I have a solid history in agriculture. And if there's anything I know from agriculture, which I would love the modern business environment to know, is everything is connected. The water we use, the soil, the seed, the machinery, the livelihoods of the people, it is all interconnected. And sometimes we just focus on one idea. What agriculture did poorly in the last 50 years and create the green revolution about, which ended up in diabetes and health problems in many parts of the world, is we thought productivity. Let's get a good seed and plant it everywhere all at once. And we're boosting yields because we had this GDP productivity yield fetish, which was much more important than can the people who live in the region live from that? Is it good enough livelihood? So we've got the price of core products and staples still not reflecting their true cost. And also we've, ruined vast amounts of land, water systems and livelihoods and nutrition, the plates that we eat off are not representative of the biodiversity our human bodies need. They are representative of the effectiveness and the productivity gains we've made in seed science and soil science. And so I think as we see, and, I work on that in the multilateral space, we're doing massive of monocropping, seed choice, crop rotation, using things like genetic editing with a climate sensitive focus. There's opportunity everywhere in here. But when we take that systems perspective and we think about the multiple scenarios that we could be living with, then we're naturally creating solutions that are going to be more fit for future as well as for today. And it's not a whack-a-mole situation. There is never one indicator that will help us move forward in anything. There's always many, and there's always positive and negative externalities. And I would say the leaders of today, these are two things, the long-termism and then the adaptive pathways, systems thinking. That's going to give you a type of decision insurance to offer a CEO, a board, a shareholder, or a government regulator in trying to convince them about why the approach is going to be compelling. Do you experience that? Like, what do you feel in Australia, Cherry and Mick and Alan? What are you noticing there about these sorts of approaches?
When we started the podcast, we played an interview with a professor here who has done some research and has interviewed CEOs around the world, including here in Australia. And what he said basically was that Australian CEOs are thinking about acquisitions and stakeholders. And that's where their focus is, not so much on what you're talking about at all.
Interesting point about the long-termism. From working with family offices, investment instruments, whether they're public or private in terms of intergenerational wealth, I noticed the interest in thinking we're making decisions today and we're expecting it to yield in 20 years. The idea, certainly what I see in my world, is the idea of a 1.5-year cycle on return is getting less interesting as a value proposition for either investments or solutions. And the long-term, we are seeing instruments here, certainly all the public funding instruments, either from the European Commission or German government, as well as I said, family offices and intergenerational wealth investors, is like, we know it's tough right now, and we know that there's a point of transition. So the maturity of understanding that there is transformation required now for yield and return in the future, and that it is not a 1.5-year cycle, is certainly very evident. Yet when I had a really interesting experience where I had some European Union financial instrument funders in a room with classic private equity types, and we found that it almost got to a yelling perspective in terms of trying to understand each other, which was one was looking for that short-term return, and the other one was saying, but it's going to have a long-term cost. And it was great and harrowing to be in the room to see what those different natures of investments and returns were really looking for. Because if you were going to be some sort of an SME or a multinational that was looking to make a systemic change, it's a really difficult environment. And I empathize with the Australian CEOs that you speak right now, because if on one side they're being held accountable for short-termism, yet on the other side, they know very full well that the only way that their employees and their product and their company is going to extend beyond the next 10 years is with a long-term focus. Those are mixed signals. And we have to somehow do something about unraveling and having a strong, hard look about, well, what is this next 10 years looking like?
What would your advice be then?
Well, you know that long-termism is one of my attitudes. So I'm looking at a 10 to 15 year approach to investment. I'm also believing that the next generations that we have are strong and capable leaders who have a very good understanding of profit, growth, and responsibility that I think us and our previous generations didn't have so well. I see regulatory frameworks from ASEAN, from the European Union, from the African Union, consistently all looking at and starting to set in place frameworks that are going to force and shift the thinking. I also see exactly these intergenerational wealth offices, which have traditionally been the original PE since serfdom. They are also changing their tunes because they're seeing that that's what intergenerational wealth is. It's not a 1.5-year return. It is intergenerational for a reason. So my advice then is having those honest conversations, and then they are with the shareholders saying, look, this is what an investment program is. And I think it takes understanding that the role in the organization, you as a person will be gone by the time the magic happens. So I think there's got to be a little bit of detangling the ego, not wanting to be the one that runs across the line with the medal in hand, and recognizing you're a part of a greater set of decisions of which you can play a very mature role right now that moves the lever to greater growth in however you want to define that growth. And it doesn't have to be you, the one that's going to be reporting on pieces. And I think there is, who was that? I was reading about a mayor in a European city just last week who opened a new transport hub, and they got the past 4 mayors to stand on stage with them. And their attitude was, we're only opening this multimodal transport hub today because Mayor X 20 years ago made the brave decision to conduct the feasibility here. Mayor Y 15 years ago made this decision. Mayor Z made this investment. And it was just, I think I get goosebumps when I think about it, but it's that mature thinking that we are part of a lineage of decision makers, and the sovereignty of the decision today is made in context of the past and the future. And so I think there's an aspect in there to unravel. Like, Robin, what do you see in the technology space?
Yeah, there's now so many that we can start diving into. I think like it's a really good conversation that we're starting here, and there's like a lot of like to go into. I think like if we just like go a little bit, predicting the future is very easy and very hard at the same time, because it's really easy to say something that sounds plausible, but it's really hard to work towards that or validate that or see how this is unfolding then in reality. And if we just like circling a little bit back to this activation part there, because I think that's a good perspective that we can take here, is everything that Liz just said, I totally agree on like how we should approach that. And I think there's like 2 more things that are probably relevant here. Like, one is, what are the personal skills that I have as an individual leading towards activation? And activation itself is basically many, many skills. It's like motivation, it's inspiring, it's educating, it's teaching, it's learning, and so on and so forth. So you need to embrace quite a lot yourself. And then you also have like this systematic environment around you that you're in. So if you're in an organization, if you're within a company setup, you are dependent on certain systematic rules that are unfolding outside. And one pretty simple space, capitalism. So, and you can break this really simple down. Everything that's good for EBIT will be done by default because it contributes to a capitalistic economy. And now it's a question, is this good or bad? That's for another podcast probably, but it's a simple way of how the market works and how businesses ultimately will be also rewarded either by their shareholders or even their stakeholders in parts. But that doesn't necessarily lead to the best possible outcome an organization can achieve. And then it's like, where are you in? Are you in a long-term game? Then probably you're playing this differently compared to if you are a turnaround CEO that just got appointed to bring this company into a different shape for the next quarter. Then you're on a completely different scheme of operations here. So I think we need to on the one hand side embrace that there's more nuances to that, and that's really hard to say like what's the right approach dependent on where you start. But what I think is like really important to embrace is that every business is somewhere else along this journey, and every business is started with the idea to exist. Nobody starts a company and say like, oh, I'm doing this for 5 years and then off we go. No, you might say, oh, I'm doing this for 5 years and I'm selling this company because then it can live there and then it can scale there or whatever. But nobody starts a company and say, I'm doing this 5 years and then this company dies. At least I have never met someone like that. And if someone did that after 4 years, most people are falling in love with what they're doing, and then it changes. So by default, I would argue that most organizations are existing because they want to exist. And existence has different kind of reality. So you might be in survival mode, right? Might be, oh, I need to make this earnings next quarter in order to pay all the salaries and continue the quarter after. Or it might be that you're in a positive situation where you can say like, oh, I can now think about my 15 years, 20 years, 30 years plan with the same mindset at the same time. It's like, it might be that next quarter I will change it because something around me is happening. And getting comfortable with this discomfort of permanent change and dynamic around an organization, I think is really, really crucial and something that we don't embrace in leadership and organizational development nowadays. Because what we are embracing is to give an absolute answer to a very simple question. Most of the time, the questions, by the way, are also really bad. But we are trained to give an answer. Like if you think about school, we ask like, hey, what's 1 + 1 is 2? We're not asking, oh, why is it actually 2? Could there be another answer? It's just like making something stupid up here. And the same applies in business. Someone asks a question and we want to give an answer to that question rather than first of all saying, let me think about that. Let me also challenge if your question is good. And like one of the biggest questions that we probably ask all the time in companies is how, right? So how do we use artificial intelligence to be more productive? How do we use whatever? And the problem with that is then some leaders become smart and say, how is not the right question? Now we ask why. Why are we using AI for whatever? But this is also like a really boring question because it's annoying, right? If someone asks you all the time, why should we use this? Why should we use that? Why should we all, like everybody that has children or deals with children, right, knows that it can be really exhausting. And also like from cognitive science, we know that if you are ignoring all the whys, that's bad. And if you're responding to all the whys, it's also bad. The best results are actually achieved if you're asking not why, but what if, or why do you think this could be? So it's the activation part in the other direction. So I think we need to embrace in business, not only asking, how do we use that? Why do we need to do that? What's the purpose? But really like saying like, let's anticipate the future and say like, what if scenario A happens? What happens if scenario B happens? I think if we go more into this anticipation of a potential future, knowing that we will divert along this route, then we can really become much better as an organization. We can embrace our own weaknesses and connect the teams and have all these puzzle pieces. Because it might be that you have someone in your team that is a super motivator, but a total chaotic guy or whatever. So you probably want to say like, okay, we need this motivational piece, but we need someone structured to bring this in line and into operations. So I think we really need this nuanced approaches to that and really understanding what is the environment that we're living in, what's the system that is basically the operation scheme, and how can we live in this system to actually exist as an organization for as long as possible. And for some, it will be EBIT optimization for the next 4 quarters, and for the next one, it will be sustained long-term. And in this decision, we need to figure out what we believe is the right thing to do. And this incentive, I think, is quite often missing.
I love that. And I think that's where I'd love to see more leaders doing that. What's come to my mind while you're sharing that was, it sort of doubles back a bit on one thing that Liz asked earlier, which was, how our business is here in Australia. And what came to mind for me is there's the energy company Woodside, which for a long time has been renowned as being the worst and the terriblest in the whole of Australia. And then shockingly, their stakeholders, shareholders in the last AGM a few months ago, kicked back and said, hey, this is all wrong. Now, I'm playing it to play this back into the context you've just been sharing there, Robin. This is one where there is that diversity of thought, just they're not listening to each other. There is this idea that, we need to adapt now because we need to, but we're not ready to adapt. We weren't expecting this to happen. And suddenly there's this panic. I'm wondering, and that's quite prevalent in Australia's very resource-rich sort of landscape. I'm wondering what we can do or what can be done to foster that collaboration and alignment across the groups, which are sometimes not even heard, like shareholders. Yeah, we're doing this for the shareholders, but they don't know that shareholders don't like it, which actually goes back to another point, by the way, that Liz, you mentioned, is how you get these chemical companies, the plastic companies. They might think that the shareholders don't care, but maybe they do. How can we get that alignment and actually get people to start listening to the greater, what's happening out there more than just what they think they want to hear?
Yeah, I can start with a really brief answer on that, because I think the answer to that is very difficult to realize, but very easy to start. And I think it's really having like these meaningful conversations with the people and just like talking about what one believes and what others are out there. I think we have way too many pleasing conversations out there. It's not it's not about like fighting. It's about like having this conversation like, I disagree with you without meaning I don't like you, right? And many people connect this like, oh, I disagree with you, I don't like you. That's not the point. It's just like we have different kind of ideas, and then also having this willingness, if I disagree with you initially, and then we dance around this topic, having this meaningful conversation, and then I come to the point, Alan is actually right, that I then have, whatever word you want to use, brevity, say like, oh, Alan was actually right, I was wrong, and that's why I changed my opinion now and go with something else, or I agree to this part. And I think like we are way too often in this absolutes of our own thoughts without reflecting onto that, because I mean, there's like so much out there that we can't be aware of. It's impossible. We are generating more knowledge every single day now than, I don't know, I don't have the last numbers, but it's significant. And a lot of this is just like random opinion without any depth of a reference point. So people are just like saying something without like saying, oh, well, what's the foundation for that? What's the belief of that? Where does the data come from? So it's a lot of like this ambiguity in the information, and we're just picking this up. I mean, Liz mentioned that insurance for decisions and being evidence-based. So I think that's really one part. And we really need to get out of this opinion against your opinion, but saying my opinion against your opinion with the aim of figuring out what's the best way forward. It's not about who is right and who is wrong. It's about figuring out what drives progress in our own belief. And that's a completely different way of thinking. It's a completely different way of managing. And we have a systematic problem there. You're not getting promoted for that. You're getting promoted for being right. You're getting promoted for dominating other people. And you're getting promoted if you're driving the KPIs that are the easiest to measure. Most things that are not easy to measure will never get promoted. And then we need the urgency behind that. I mean, we talk a little bit about like climate change. But climate change, my grandmother already talked about. And that's nothing that is just like coming around the corner in the year 2024, saying, like, by the way, we have also climate change. No, this topic is ongoing since ever. But if there's no urgency and if it's not relevant, well, let someone else figure it out down the road, then we have a problem. So anticipating the future, taking this serious, having more meaningful conversations, all really hard discussions and hard topics to crack. But I think it's a starting point. And it's not about like saying we're going to solve now, let's stick with the plastics. Right now, we're going for a plastic-free world. That might be a good ambition. Well, let's start small. Let's probably think about first, where is it not necessary to have this and where can we probably shift a little bit? Because not everything is just bad and good at the same. It's like, it's a progress. You don't need to be the most sustainable company, whatever that means today, but you need to demonstrate that you're working toward that. And if it takes 50 years, so shall it be. Every single day, you need to do something on that. And breaking this down to these micro ambitions, tiny little baby steps will drive ultimately progress. Because sooner or later, you will have flywheels, you will have spillover effects, and people get activated.
Wow. Good one, Robin. I agree. To that, I would add also that sometimes the governance just sucks, and it's worth looking at that. So I sit on I've been now on 16 multilateral boards of large organizations with a lot of money, with a lot of scrutiny. So often, our governing instruments are outdated. And the way the governance structures are working with the shareholders, whether they're private shareholders in a public environment or public fundees in a multilateral environment, sometimes that's just wrong. And in my opinion, we don't often enough. And this was, I had an Australian CEO and a GM of a large public Australian company visit me last week. We had a holiday together and we spent a lot of our holiday. Actually, I was asking them how much that they as CEO and GMs are working with their boards within their governance to right-size their governance, which is then steering the organization. One thing, the Woodside example, shareholder activism is a really great one to look at, as well as, in Germany, we see sometimes employees protesting out the front of their own companies against obvious greenwashing and things. When the governance sucks, management are being held accountable to metrics and their performance management and things like that are measured on it, yet the organization, as you say, sometimes saying other things to the shareholders. Lining that up and having very honest conversations with the shareholders through the governing instruments will set the organization on a very different track. And it will give management a greater space to breathe the creativity and the solutionism that they need. It also will very quickly weed out the parts of the ecosystem that just don't belong on that vision. So I would honestly say the first thing to look at is the governing instruments and how they're truly set up for what needs to happen, the willingness for the board and in the entire series of accountability chain to agree on what that is and then set the performance targets based on that. The moment that happens, everything changes because then, Cherry, you're an expert in this area about individuals' contributions to organizational changes. Well, then it becomes quite simple. And we have a lot of exceptional performance management. I know Australia is really great with OKRs and agile leadership. I know we've got a lot of skills in those areas. And so therefore, I think it's pretty hard if as a person, an individual somewhere within management or leadership, the direction it's supposed to be going in, but your entire governance and accountability is set up in the wrong way. Well, boom, you'll never, ever, ever win. And I think the willingness to sit down, and that does mean I've been on changes where we've changed charters that require an act of parliament, which require giving back money, which require a lot of hard decisions, but the freedom that gives to an organization to do what it needs to do is worth it. And so I strongly push us. Right now I'm kicking off a governance working group where we're even just looking again, is our governance? Because I think so often in accountability, we're looking at defending and overseeing, looking at ourselves and where we're right sizing where those train tracks are set. So that is one very simple but hard solution.
It sounds like we need very brave leaders to make that bigger, significant change. So we just got to find those or unlock their ability.
May I politely disagree with you about braveness? I don't think it's a bravery thing. When we come to evidence-based decision making, you don't need courage for that. You just need honesty. And so I think what we have is we have a lot of numbers. We have a lot of metrics. We're great at measuring things. Numbers don't lie. There's interpretation of numbers, which has something in it. And what I feel is that we do a little bit too often is we take KPMG reports and EY reports and the Big Four, we take white papers from governance, but we're not looking at the genuine evidence which exists in our organizations, empower our management and leadership to use their own data management skills and interpret our own data that tells us exactly where we are going. As a board member, I don't accept a Big Four report as evidence. That's the last thing from evidence, in my opinion. The evidence that I will make a decision on and promise our shareholders the truth, and I will guard the back of our management until the death, is when I see the evidence. And so here is where I think we can work with it. And so I don't think it's bravery. I think it's effort. It's a bit boring because it's being willing to not skim, read, and put through ChatGPT, Big Four report, and try to right-size it to our own mission, which I have seen far too often. But it's looking at the very small data. It's like from period X to period Y, these were exactly the numbers. And maybe our data sets are a bit small. Maybe they're statistically not even significant yet, but it only happens when we take our own data and knowledge, and we can't compare ourselves in Australia to what Europe is doing. What are we, 20-something million, and we're comparing to a 500 million economy? It doesn't work like that. What we have to do is come up with our own solutions and be right-sizing with our own data. So I would disagree that it's bravery, it's logic, and it's evidence. And we're just willing to put the effort in. As my friends last week were saying, honestly, they're saying, I don't think our team has the intelligence or the skills to do that. Boom. There you go, leader, in terms of what is the upskilling to be doing with the team? Do we need to catch each other in trust falls? Or do we need to spend a little bit of time learning how do you actually read the numbers? That's also okay too.
If I may add one comment onto that, because I absolutely love this aspect, but I want to point out one more thing from an organizational perspective, because I think like this whole activity of making things valuable and not taking always the shortcut of outsourcing something or taking like random or superficial information is such an important part. And I personally believe that in most organizations, you can cut 30-40% of work out without feeling any difference, because we're doing so much useless reporting, so much useless collection of data that just feels totally random. And I just give you a really practical example. As an organization ourselves that is working with so many large companies in Europe or like all around the world, basically, like the biggest, like one of those things that I find like really frustrating all the time is that you're now getting like all these requests for reporting information, like how many employees do you have and all this kind of stuff. That's fine. And I was like, how do you save energy in your business? How do you do whatever? And you fill it out, and like every company has a different standard. You're sending this all the time. I'm actually, I could probably hire someone just filling out these random reports where you know exactly they're never going to appear anywhere for valuable decision making, which is fine. And you get exactly the same feedback from within the organization. People saying, and we're just asking, hey, cool. I like that you're doing something with that. What are you going to do with that? Maybe I can enrich this even. That becomes valuable. And people say, yeah, I'm putting this into a spreadsheet and then it goes into PowerPoint and then nobody will ever look into this. And I think and this is frustrating for the people. If you're to improve your overall value chain and you know everything you're doing just goes into a random piece of paper that nobody is really interested in, that nobody takes action on, then you're not willing to do something. And that's part of the activation as well. If you give value to that, then it's great. But we're losing so much value creation that could drive us positively forward by just reducing like the bullshit. Sorry for using this word here. And like really making it valuable and saying like, this is the evidence we need for this particular decision. And that's why we're doing this. Fine. I will write as many pages as you need in order to achieve this goal. But if you're just asking me to fill out a spreadsheet that someone puts onto a cloud server and never looks at again, I'm not willing to do that because that doesn't help anybody.
I love where this conversation went from me making a statement which got a very bold response like Ulyss, but it's brought the conversation, it exemplifies the point that we need to be able to voice the ideas, listen to them, hear one another, and come out with whatever we understand. Thank you both for that.
We have a segment called Rapid Fire Tip for Action, and it's an opportunity for you to provide actionable insights to our listeners to inspire them and for them to take action as well. So my first question for you, Liz, is what's the most impactful action someone can take to support a business revolution in their organization?
The first thing to do is to see things in a systems perspective. We often look at things in isolation. It's this metric or it's that product. And I would say, imagine you're a photographer and you open the aperture on your lens. That is to give you also a view. That's how I work in environmental science. That's how we in global environmental science are working now. We never look at one seed, one topic, one water basin. We look at ecosystems. So it is, what is the ecosystem you're in? And where would the proposed intervention bring value and damage, and be willing to weigh up the outcomes of the two.
And Robin, what's one thing that everyone can do right now to contribute to a better world?
I think the really best part everybody could do is just like make sure they are contributing to that and really challenging what they are doing day in, day out, and saying like, is this really contributing for what I believe in? Do I really need to attend another meeting? We have a whole workforce that just does meetings and never works on these meetings before and after. So just like cutting out non-value drivers and replacing them with value drivers, I think is really, really important. And then probably the easiest one to start with is really starting with yourself and breaking it down and living also a lifestyle that supports that, like being healthy, doing exercise, sleeping well. That leads to high performance. You can't run a marathon with a stone in your shoe. And if you have a stone in your shoe, you need to take it out first.
If you want to learn more and connect with Liz and Robin, you can connect on LinkedIn and also check out their website, which will be in the show notes. And that's a wrap for today's episode of The Business Revolution. We hope you enjoy diving deep into the world of business and sustainability with us.
And remember, the revolution doesn't end here. It's up to each and every one of us to take the knowledge and the inspiration that you hopefully got today from today's episode and turn it into action.
Whether it's implementing sustainable practices in your own business or advocating for change in your community, every step counts towards building a better future.
So don't forget to visit our website at businessrevolution.earth for more resources, past episodes, and ways to actually get involved.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't hold back with letting us know. You can, first of all, subscribe to the podcast, but you can also rate it and review it. And we'd love to hear from you. So your feedback always helps us, finding ideas for other topics that we should be talking about and, reaching out to more listeners.
Thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation. Together, we can revolutionize the way we do business and create a world that's sustainable for generations to come.
Stay tuned for insights, inspiration, and actionable ways to help reshape the way that we do business for a better tomorrow at all of our levels, for all of us to be part of the solution.
Until next time, keep innovating, keep inspiring, and keep pushing for positive change for a brighter tomorrow. This is Mick.
And Cherry.
And Alan, signing off. Don't forget, the business revolution starts with you.